So, the Kuzari, we left off with the very interesting, I should get a bookmark, right? So that I don't have to keep finding it. So, the really, really tough question. This is what we were trying to answer. Question was, okay, you people had experience of God, so you experienced Him corporeal with a bodily images. So he says, no, we don't imagine God with a bodily image. It's not true. This is not what we do. We experience God, and there's no problem with God telling us, talking to us, experiencing Him, and it doesn't imply that God is a body. So he says, okay, that's beautiful. Great. So what are you going to do with the idol? They built an idol, and they worshipped an idol. So what are you telling me? No, we are pure philosophers. We only imagine God in abstract form. He says, what are you talking about? This is where we left off.
Why doesn't the rabbi say that's not how we imagine God being? It's just
so, but the question is, okay, you experienced God, then you create a golden calf.
But that's what
why?
Because they just got out of Egypt from where that's their idea of what you pray to.
Okay, so
why?
Obviously there's a problem here.
Right.
God told them don't do it. So we're going to try to figure out what does the Kuzari say was the problem with the golden calf. That's what we're going to spend our time today. All right, so he says the Kuzari, he says, okay, what is it? So he says, let me tell you first the greatness of these people, the people of Israel. Because remember what he said first? His first answer was, the greater the person is, the greater the sin. So he's going to have to establish the greatness of the Jewish people who experienced God, which is a very, very important yesod in Judaism. That is, we think of them are as a bunch of slaves, that they're really silly, they didn't really know anything, and they're back. The question is, do we have a basis for that? Right? In Judaism, before we say something, we have to say, how do you know this? Right? That's what the first rule you learn in learning Gemara. Is to ask, how do you know this? How do we know this? Why does the Gemara say this? Where does it know this? So the same thing we're going to have to learn about the nature of the people who were there. So he says, first of all, you have to understand that my testimony or my best evidence is that God chose them to be, of all the nations, He chose them to reveal Himself. Did He do it by an accident? Was it an accident that God revealed Himself to them? Anybody?
I thought it was asking whether He chose or whether it was an accident that He revealed.
He said no. He said God chose them to be His people and reveal Himself, right? But that choosing was accidental. Like He was going to do it on Tuesday afternoon at 12 o'clock, no matter who. If there was nobody there, He would reveal Himself. If the Edomites passed by, they would get it. Was it that way, or were they selected? Clearly, they were selected. He says, Rabbi, come on, doesn't make any sense. But you have to remember, we have to give both sides, right? What are the options? Planned or not planned? So, say planned. Now, he says, look at this. That the divine matter, the divine experience, rested upon them such that they all reached a level of rationality. So they were all, their ability, rational thinking was very high. And he says, and even the women became prophets. And he says, and after that point, it never happened again. God never revealed Himself to a group ever again. To individuals, yes. A woman here, a woman there, right? We have in the Tanakh, we have stories of women. who God revealed himself to, or angels, but not to everybody. And he says, since Adam Arishon, who was the most perfect human being without any limitation, that is, without any reservation of his perfection as a human being, not as a being. He says, no one argues that he was not perfect. And he was made out of the best material. He has the greatest form, everything. He had he had the greatest food, everything. He had everything, right? And we see that he was able to connect to God, right? He was able to understand things about creation that nobody else could. And really, if you think about it, he was called by some the Son of God. Ben Elokim, says the Kuzari. He was created by God. There is no higher human form than Adam Arishon. You see where he's going with his argument? What is he going to say now? Finish his thought. So the question I'm asking is, he's saying, first he said, you have to understand that these people merited God revealing himself to them. All of them. That never happened. Before or after. Put that aside. So that's one part of his argument. They really were on a different madrega. Put it aside. Next. Then he says, look at Adam. Adam Arishon. Created by God himself. The most perfect creation. And he sinned! That's exactly the point. Do you see how the Kuzari is explaining, the rabbi here is explaining the king what the problem is? He says, you are saying that these people had experienced God and then they sinned. How could they? Anyone who would experience God should not sin. And what is he bringing evidence for him? Adam's connection to the Kadosh Baruch Hu was much higher level.
Even at the Moshe?
Probably not. But it was maybe. They say that Moshe actually restored what was in Adam Arishon. But it's not the same, because remember, he was in Gan Eden. Garden of Eden is not here. It's not here. There's nothing obstructing you from God. Nothing. Yet, he sinned. So he's essentially saying to the king, so what do you want from them? So we continue. He says he had many children. And he says, and Hevel reached his level. But when Cain killed him, right? Because why? Says the Kuzari, because he was jealous of the spiritual level of Hevel. Hevel was, let's say, at level here, and Cain was here. And Cain wanted to get to that level.
Murder is the way.
I don't know. Look, there was a movement in Judaism a long time ago that said that redemption is through sin. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. But there are people who always have this warped sense that if you do a sin for the sake of a sin, it's going to... There's a Gemara like that. Gdola avera lishma, mitzvah shelo lishma. There's a Gemara like that. I don't want to get into this sugya. We can do that another time to actually learn what do Chazal mean by that? How does it work itself out? What are the implications for it? All of that. But here we see that Cain decided to kill it. Then God gave Adam Seth, who was also similar to Adam and was very special. And from there you have to Enosh, and then to Noah. And then all of them were similar to Adam, that they were called Bnei Elokim, the sons of God, because they were created and their the way they live their life, and arichut hayamim, the length of their days, and by the wisdom that they had and their abilities and all of that. We say for Adam to Noach, and from Noach to Abraham, we see that the inyan Elohi, the ability to connect to God, passed down from Adam, 10 generations came to Noah. Noah, 10 generations, it rested with Abraham. Okay? And he says that each of the brothers went to a different direction, right? Shem, Cham, Yefet. They went to a different direction. Yefet went north, Cham went south, Shem stayed sort of in the middle. And then from Avram, you have Yitzchak, and then Yitzchak to Yaakov, right? And it all is related to the land of Israel. Because prophecy is connected to Eretz Israel. It's not only having Inyan Eloki in you, but also having connection to Eretz Israel.
How about outside of Israel?
Chazal, what?
How about outside of Israel?
If the prophecy is related to Eretz Israel, then it's fine. But it has to be connected to Eretz Israel.
It's like someone like Nostradamus, like, would you consider him a real prophet or not?
Would I consider him a real prophet? If it's in a yeshiva, you want me to consider a guy who just wrote down predictions? He didn't think of himself as a prophet. He made predictions that are so vague. On a Wednesday, there will be a moon. Yeah, okay. Nevuah, we have definitions of what a prophet is and what is a false prophet and all of that. So I don't think that there's anybody who takes him seriously outside of those sort of like the folk. It's like almanac. Farmer's almanac about it's going to be a really stormy winter. It's going to be a really snowy. In the Midwest, in America, it's a big thing. Oh, according to the Farmer's Almanac, it's going to be one of the coldest winters. Like, how do they know that? In the Middle Ages, if you predicted the weather, not in the Jewish world, you would be considered a witch. Because how would you know? Which we think of as like, you're right. How would somebody know? Today we have Doppler weather, you've got this radar and that radar. Okay, so you can predict. But back then, how could you predict what the weather was going to be?
You had a bum leg.
Bum leg. Yeah. Then we'll see if you can swim with it. If you swim, you must be a witch. If you drown, I guess not. Right?
It's great logic.
Right. It's beautiful. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Chances are your land is also mine now.
Dope.
And the fish get.
Let's keep going. So he says all of the sons of Yaakov received this ability to connect to God, and they had a special place to do this. And he says that was the beginning of the Inyan Eloki to rest on the people, the Jewish people. And so it went from individuals, right, from Adam Arishon to Yaakov. It's individuals. Then you have in the family. And from that family, it goes to every single Jew. So he says, why is that? Why is that? Why do you think this is so? See if you can come up with a reason.
So Hashem could talk to the masses.
Okay. But that's sort of thinking, but what was it at this time that it took place?
What was the reason that they all got prophecy?
Or the ability to prophesy. Doesn't mean that they were prophets. They simply had the ability. They had the ability to do that.
Does it have something to do with not being as wicked?
I think you're going on the right track. He says that when you have a really, really good tree with strong roots, it produces beautiful fruit. Yaakov, right, had good roots. His father, his grandfather, right? He was in Eretz Israel. What?
I was saying his great-grandfather.
His great-grandfather was a little schwach. Sada, listen, you got to start somewhere. But it's 3 generations of really exceptional people. And so that sort of created a very, very sturdy, healthy tree that produced amazing fruit. So he says, you could see, he says, you could see that when you have a very good tree, that with good roots, so that when it produces fruit, it produces a perfect fruit like the first fruit that it came from. Right? So if you really have let's say, what's a fruit that you guys like?
Oh, mango.
Mango. Mangoes are good. Mangoes are good. So if you have a really good mango from a tree that's a really good, so you take that mango and you plant it. If it's really good, what is the mango that's going to come out of it?
It's gonna taste like avocado.
It's going to, yeah, right. It's going to come out like a really good mango. And if you start out with a good mango, you're going to end with a good mango, so long as the environment, you get water and the fertilizer, all these things that fertilize it, you would have a very, very good mango. And that's what happened with Avraham, with Yaakov, with Yitzchak, with Yaakov, and with his sons, with Yosef and his brothers. And from that fruit, who do we get? Moshe, Aaron, Betzalel, Eliav, the 70 elders, that all the Yehoshua, Kalev ben Yefuneh, Hu, Miriam, you get all these people that are on the level, or they have the ability to have prophecy constantly. You never had that before. Ever heard of the idea of the perfect storm? This is the positive of the perfect storm, right? You have all the factors lining up to create a perfect situation where you have a large group of individuals that merit receiving prophecy. And he says we could see that they they merited להראות האור עליהם וההשגחה הרצונית. That is, they merited to see the divine light and the divine providence that God is taking. And אם היו ביניהם ממרים, היו נגאלים. So this is a very complicated sentence here that we are going to look at the commentators, and that he says the following, that he says if they were bad, right? If they were bad, if they at this stage would go against what God said, then he says they would be kicked out.
At which stage?
The stage before giving of the Torah. They would not. So he says, but you have to remember that they did not. They were all connected to this. So the Kuzari says to him, okay, fine, I understand that whoever sinned prior to giving of the Torah, simply the Inyan Eloki didn't come to him, and they were out. So that even, let's say you'd want to say that, okay, if Yitzchak had it, then Esav should have it, right?
Mm.
But Esav didn't. Yeah, but you. So it's a very interesting idea. So that means that when you're learning about the patriarchs, when you're learning about Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the 12, his children, you have to remember that whatever they're doing, and if it looks to you like it's a sin, it's not. You just have to look at it deeper.
So was it the reason we were in? Because I've heard that before we went into slavery, we were on like the 49th level of Tuma. Right, I imagine that.
No, in Egypt we were.
Right.
Egypt is the 49th
But
level.
does that know? not correlate with sin? They weren't sinning to be on that level of tuma.
Egypt by itself is the 49th level of Tuma.
Okay.
So that Tuma, they were there, they were brought there by God. God says to Abraham, your descendants are going to Egypt. They will be there, but then I will come and get them. And Yosef says to them, there's going to be a guy who's going to show up. If he tells you these words, it's showtime.
Can you give an example of one of those situations where forefathers did something wrong? But
They did not do something wrong.
no, that seemed to be a sin.
Yaakov stealing the blessing from his father.
I was thinking that. Is there
Right? His father's blind.
Right.
He dresses up like Purim. Right? Walks in, prepares food, says, hi, I'm Esav. And he's like, wow, what's going on here?
So they've
Is it another example?
There's lots of
Sorry,
examples.
I
What
don't
about
know.
Avram sending his wife to Pharaoh?
Oh,
Telling her, say you're my sister, and then they take her. You know, all of these things that appear to be problems, they're not. You should not be, because if you learn the sugyas in the Gemara, and you see how, according to halacha, what they did, actually, there's a mahalach there, there's a way to look at it, and they're teaching us something, they're not doing things. You know, the easiest one that everybody asks. Oh, Avram, the angels came and he served them basar v'chalav. So, what's the simple answer? He put before them meat and dairy. Correct? Fine. Did he put them at the same time, or he brought the dairy first? If he brought the dairy first, is there any problem? No.
And probably the story with Joseph and his brothers, right?
That's for sure the big issue. That's a very, very big issue. The brothers wanted to kill him.
But what,
They sold him to slavery.
so what's the? Is that one of those as well?
Yeah, but
Right.
all of these things have explanation. You just have to learn the sugya. And I'm sure that Rabbi Kaplan will. Did you go to his class at noon? In 12:15, he covers that. So I don't want to step on other people's toes.
Thank you.
We all have our.
So are you saying they didn't sin before the giving of the Torah? If they had sinned, they wouldn't have gotten the Torah.
That's what he seems to say. So, "Im ayu b'nehem mamrim, hayu nig'alim." They would be sort of kicked out. That's what the Atzar Nechmad explains, one of the commentators. So it says, "Achem bli safek zgula." They were chosen. They didn't. V'yaldu mi sheyeh zgula also. They passed from one side to another. V'nizarim ba'ava mamre ba'avur ma shitarev bo mimena zgula. So that they were very, very careful. So the Kuzari says, okay, so this is going back all the way to Adam Arishon. And Adam, I agree with you, was the greatest of all human beings. But isn't this the greatest sin? This golden calf? Remember, we are trying to understand the golden calf. But the Yehuda Levi is explaining to us how we are going to answer this. There are certain things we need to know before we get to the question, to the answer. You need to know this, you need to know this, you need to know this. He now is establishing the greatness of these people. Yes?
Sorry. They didn't sin in the sense that they didn't do something against the Torah?
Correct. That's what defines a sin. No?
Right. But how do we argue with Yaakov, Rachel, and
How do we argue with Yaakov and what?
marrying Rachel and their life?
Oh, beautiful. So the simple answer that I know of the Rishonim is that the Avot only kept the Torah in Eretz Israel. And when he came to Eretz Israel, Rachel died. It's not good. It's like a good one. Like, oh, you got lucky on that one. She died, so, Yeah, but what if she wouldn't have been dead? Well, then they would have had a different problem.
So
But there are other issues. There are other ways of out of it. You don't have to go to that pshat. There's a different pshat. Of the Bnei Noach. What?
Ones that sound less Oh, well,
Yeah,
she
yeah.
died, so that's
Wait,
why.
why couldn't he be married to both of them?
Because the Torah says you're not allowed to marry your sister or two sisters.
Ah.
You're not allowed to marry two sisters.
So
So if you're not allowed to marry two sisters, how could he marry two sisters? And remember, he didn't want to marry two sisters. It wasn't him. He wanted door number one. They gave him door number two, and he says, "Is that door number one?" He says, "Well, as far as you're concerned, it is." What does that mean? I want a door number one. Well, if you want door number one, you got to take door number two and work for another 7 years.
So we say that Avram Avinu, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they all kept the Torah. You're telling me that they didn't pass it down to their children, and then to the slaves in Egypt, they didn't know the Torah already?
So the question is, again, what did they keep? What they didn't keep? So some people say they only kept the Raisa, they didn't keep the Rabbanan. There are different shitas and Rishonim on that question. It's not a simple question. We know that they did pass it down because we see that the brothers, the brothers of Joseph, they're all, whatever they're doing is in line with the Torah. So Gemara says that they all kept the Torah. It's not that we're making this stuff up.
No, I understand. But if you're
But 400 years of enslavement is going to affect certain things.
right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But certain things they kept. You see, when they got to Egypt, Joseph was very clear to them. When they ask you, you are shepherds. When they tell you anything they say, you want to live in Goshen. Why? Pharaoh says, "Oh, come and live in the big cities. We'll give you all apartments. You stay here with us." Joseph says, "You guys say you want to be in Goshen. We want to be in Goshen. Why? Because they're going to be isolated, by themselves, close to Eretz Yisrael. They can leave when they can, And he kept them separate. He didn't want them to become. Remember, when he came to Egypt, his name was changed, given a name, a different name. Tzofnat Paneach. They dress him like an Egyptian. They give him parentheses, right? Or quotes, what they consider an Egyptian wife. Turns out that she wasn't, but as far as they were concerned, she was Egyptian. All in all, in order to get him to become an Egyptian. He understood what the Egyptians are going to try to do. And he was fighting it. First, they sent Judah to try to figure out what schooling we're going to do for the kids to maintain our identity, to the commitment to Torah, how we live. And Joseph saying, Goshen, stay in Goshen. But once the brothers died, and when Joseph died, they didn't. They moved into the cities. And they became assimilated. Started wearing tie-dye. That's how it starts. Next thing you know, I don't know. What's next after tie-dye?
Tie-dye tzitzis.
Oh, okay. So no.
What's next? Where do I get?
Okay. Let's keep going. So he says, there isn't any greater sin than what you've done. That is, the children of Israel worshiping an idol. So the rabbi says, it's because all of the nations at the time of the Exodus from Egypt worshipped images, shapes. Everybody. And if the philosophers would bring a proof that God is one, they would do it even with some sort of an image. And they would say that you see this image, this statue, God connects to this statue. And this statue then does wondrous things. He says, you have to take into consideration the context, the religious, social, historical context of that society. And in that society, everybody had idols. Everybody had idols. Today, it's very difficult to convince somebody from Western society to pray to an idol. It's very hard. Like, get like a little cute elephant and say, pray to this elephant and, you'll get a brand new car. We're like, what are you talking about? Just try it.
Just rub the belly.
Of the elephant.
That's not mistake.
What?
Like the Buddha?
Okay. Let's stop here and we'll continue tomorrow.